Welcome to our Regulation Mastery session. In this session, we will continue reading the CSSF Circular 22-806 from Part 1 Outsourcing Arrangements, Chapter 4. Governance of Outsourcing Arrangements. Subchapter 4.3 Outsourcing Process. Section 4.3.1 Pre-outsourcing Analysis. 65. Before entering into any outsourcing arrangement, in-scope entities shall a. Assess if the outsourcing arrangement concerns a critical or important function. b. Assess if the supervisory conditions for outsourcing are met. c. Identify and assess all of the relevant risks of the outsourcing arrangement. d. Undertake appropriate due diligence on the prospective service provider, and e. Identify and assess conflicts of interest that the outsourcing may cause. Subsection 4.3.1.1 Risk Assessment of Outsourcing Arrangements. 66. In-scope entities shall assess the potential impact of outsourcing arrangements on their operational capacity and risk, shall take into account the assessment results when deciding if the function shall be outsourced to a service provider, and shall take appropriate steps to avoid undue additional operational risks before entering into outsourcing arrangements. 67. The assessment shall include, where appropriate, scenarios of possible risk events, including high-severity operational risk events, in particular when the outsourcing arrangement relates to a critical or important function of the in-scope entity. Within the scenario analysis, in-scope entities shall assess the potential impact of failed or inadequate services, including the risks caused by processes, systems, people, or external events. In-scope entities shall document the analysis performed and their results, and shall estimate the extent to which the outsourcing arrangement would increase or decrease their operational risk. Small entities may use qualitative risk assessment approaches, while other in-scope entities shall have a more sophisticated approach, including, where available, the use of internal and external loss data to inform the scenario analysis. 68. When carrying out the risk assessment prior to outsourcing, and during ongoing monitoring of the service provider's performance, in-scope entities shall, at least, a. Identify and classify the relevant functions and related data and systems as regards their risk sensitivity and required security measures. b. Conduct a thorough risk-based analysis of the functions and related data and systems that are being considered for outsourcing, or have been outsourced in order to address the potential risks, in particular the operational risks, including legal, ICT, compliance and reputational risks, and the oversight limitations related to the countries where the outsourced services are or may be provided and where the data or are likely to be stored. c. Consider the consequences of where the service provider is located, within or outside the EEA, in accordance with points 61 to 64, and whether the service provider is supervised by a relevant competent authority. d. Consider the political stability and security situation of the jurisdictions in question, including I. The laws in force, including laws on data protection. 2. The law enforcement provisions in place, and 3. The insolvency law provisions that would apply in the event of a service provider's failure, and any constraints that would arise in respect of the urgent recovery of the in-scope entity's data in particular. e. Define and decide on an appropriate level of protection of data confidentiality, of continuity of the activities outsourced, and of the integrity and traceability of data and systems in the context of their intended outsourcing. In-scope entities shall also consider specific measures, where necessary, for data in transit, data in memory and data at rest, such as the use of encryption technologies in combination with an appropriate key management architecture. F. Consider whether the service provider is a subsidiary or parent undertaking of the in-scope entity, is included in the scope of accounting consolidation, and if so, the extent to which the in-scope entity controls it, or has the ability to influence its actions. 69. Within the risk assessment, in-scope entities shall also take into account the expected benefits and costs of the proposed outsourcing arrangement, including weighing any risks that may be reduced or better managed against any risks that may arise as a result of the proposed outsourcing arrangement, taking into account at least a. Concentration risks, including from I. Outsourcing to a dominant service provider that is not easily substitutable, and 2. Multiple outsourcing arrangements with the same service provider or closely connected service providers. B. The aggregated risks resulting from outsourcing several functions across the in-scope entity, and, in the case of groups of in-scope entities, the aggregated risks on a consolidated basis. C. In the case of significant in-scope entities 29, the step-in risk, i.e. the risk that may result from the need to provide financial support to a service provider in distress, or to take over its business operations, and D. The measures implemented by the in-scope entity and by the service provider to manage and mitigate the risks. 70. Where the outsourcing arrangement includes the possibility that the service provider sub-outsources critical or important functions, or material parts thereof, to other service providers, in-scope entities shall take into account a. The risks associated with sub-outsourcing, including the additional risks that may arise if the subcontractor is located in a third country or a different country from the service provider. B. The risk that long and complex chains of sub-outsourcing reduce their ability to oversee the outsourced critical or important function and the ability of competent authorities to effectively supervise them.